I thank Sir Edward for moving this debate, and the remarks we've heard today have been very powerful. Last week, as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I travelled to the West Bank, to the occupied Palestinian territories through Area C. We also visited Saudi, where we met with leaders discussing their plans and their hopes for peace. We went to Jordan and met their ministers and again discussed their plans and their hopes for peace. And finally, we also went to Tel Aviv and to Jerusalem, to East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. We went into the heart of the Knesset and we met with our counterparts in the Foreign Affairs Committee there. It was a sobering trip, but I believe in the invaluable power of diplomacy and the immeasurable chances to see this in person so that we come back and speak authentically about the realities of what's happening on the ground. Personally, as the daughter of a community who have faced persecution and fled armed conflict, I found this a particularly emotional and tough trip. In Israel and Palestine, the depth and strength of feeling on both sides is palpable. There are painstaking and tireless diplomatic efforts being put in by the United Kingdom and our FCDO staff on the ground in the region. And our ambassadors are an unsung testament to Britain's efforts to find peace, which is why politicians in the UK, as all of us are, must not inflame tensions. And we must genuinely commit to working to find a peaceful way forward while holding to account the atrocities that we all know are happening. I've come home determined to redouble all I can do to find peace, but also to stand up and be a voice for the things I've seen. In Israel, it is evident that the release of hostages and the return of the bodies is paramount. It seems to be hampering any chance for progress. They're a nation that are in collective, deep trauma and grief. Every single person has a story of being touched by the terror of October 7th and of Hamas. I met with former hostage families, some themselves who are calling for peace, who feel the pain of what's happening on the Palestinian side. And still, they want our hand of peace and friendship, and they want us to understand what they're going through. I was there on the day of the Bibas family funerals, a mother and her 2 young babies who were killed. The grief is permeating throughout the society there, and I fear that they may never recover from that, and we must show that as global partners we understand this grief. But the frustrations of the people in Israel are absolutely palpable, and the frustrations are with their political class. Sitting down with counterparts in the Knesset, I saw no will or desire to push forward for peace. And it was sobering, and it was frankly quite depressing. And without breaking diplomatic protocol, some of what was openly said to us as members of the UK Foreign Affairs Committee was sobering. I certainly wouldn't be saying things like that in the UK Parliament. It's not acceptable, and we must call it out at every turn. They're not willing to accept the hand of support from stable regions in the Middle East, and I fear this will hamper their efforts. Normalisation with Saudi is key to finding a way forward. But despite this, I also met Israelis, brave Israelis, who are putting their lives on the line, working in NGOs, who are pushing forward for peace and trying to find a path forward. And we must remember that they too are struggling against a government that doesn't seem to be listening to them. In the occupied Palestinian territories, where I was the only member of parliament who was able to go in there to meet the Bedouin women and their children, some of what I heard and was witness to when they showed me things on their phones, I care not to repeat in here. But the settler violence that they're facing, in particular the women and children, are unfathomable, and we must call this out. The wider conditions to the community are stark. Their access to electricity is limited. Their access to water is hampered. There is a stream within touching distance, and they are unable to use that stream. In fact, there is a sign erected above the stream with the Star of David, which makes very clear that they are unable to touch or even drink that water. It is terrifying and shocking. And I tell you this, that I was there as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee with full diplomatic protection, with security, with a reinforced 4x4. And we still had guns pointed in our faces. We were still terrified. And our drivers would still not take us any further into Area C for fear of what would happen to us. And I was there as a British Member of Parliament. Could you imagine what the Bedouin people are facing day in, day out. The settler violence that they're facing, the IDF turn up, the police turn up, and they let this happen. It is sanctioned by the state. It is sanctioned by the IDF, and it is sanctioned by the police. And the intimidation and violation is around the clock for them. The realities of settler violence is not going away, and we must call this out. In the old city, the arbitrary demolishing of family homes and of homes of generations past is stark. It was shown to me by a brave Palestinian man and a brave Israeli NGO worker who walked us around. He told me that he was expecting to get a call from the security services the minute we left, because as we know, it's the most surveilled place on earth. There are cameras at every turning. And I walked past the rubble of family homes, of lives once lived, and I felt the fear of those still living. But despite this, their resilience and their determination to stand for their homes and their land is unwavering. The UK must continue to push for the unhindered access to and the provision of aid. We must resist the Knesset's crippling restrictions to NGOs and foreign aid workers. We must resist their ability to block foreign reporters from reporting what's happening on the ground. And we must allow humanitarian aid access into the West Bank and, crucially, into Gaza. I asked the Minister today on what our government's response is to the settler violence and call for the consideration of sanctions on settlement goods. We know Israel is now stopping entry of all aid into Gaza. We must condemn this at every level. Hamas's military capabilities need to be eliminated, but an ideology is much harder to root out. But with time and peace and education, this is possible. The Palestinian Authority needs political reform so that they have the confidence of the Palestinian people. But what's clear, Chair, is that both sides cannot do it alone. International allies and allies in the region have a seismic role to play, and we too in this room have a seismic role to play. I won't forget what I've seen for the rest of my life, but I've promised that I come back redoubled to be a strong voice here and to work with partners globally to push forward so that the region may finally see peace, that Palestinians will have their statehood, and that Israel can be safe and secure. Thank you.